So before getting started with today's episode, I briefly wanted to go over my motivation. Why is it that I even chose to do an episode of this nature? And for me, I really wanted to demonstrate to you how exactly to have an uncomfortable conversation and remain respectful while you're doing it. There's a number of conversations that you're going to have throughout your life. Some of them you're going to enjoy, and then there's others that you're not going to like so much. The uncomfortable variety. Whether you find yourself at a friend's party or perhaps a work function, and all of a sudden you're thrust into a conversation that you didn't expect to find yourself in, and on top of that, you don't really feel comfortable with what it is that you're discussing. It makes you feel uncomfortable, and how exactly you conduct yourself when you find yourselves in this situation is important, right? So, there's a few scenarios. You can gracefully bow out and, just agree slightly, perhaps disagree slightly, and then kind of walk away, maybe make up an excuse. So that's one option. There's another option where you can engage, and then perhaps you could let your emotions get the best of you. And at that point, there's probably some strong words being said. There might be a little bit of yelling. And then eventually you're going to walk away as well because everyone's uncomfortable due to the fact that the conversation has deteriorated into a yelling match. So of course that's not a very good scenario at all. And of course there's another scenario where you can actually choose to engage and actually have a constructive dialogue. So this is where you ask probing questions. You get to know them a little bit better. They get to know you. And then at that point, after you get to know them, after you understand their positions a little bit better and why it is that they choose to have these beliefs, then you can begin to change their mind. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on with this episode, is this last option here, where I get to know the other person and I get to understand why it is that they believe the things that they believe. And then at that point, I can begin to change their mind. Now, you may be asking yourself, as you listen, why I am not pushing back harder, why it is that I'm not shaming this individual, why I'm not yelling, why I'm not getting super emotional. And these are good questions to have. But again, the reason being that this is something that I wanted to avoid is I wanted the dialogue to remain constructive. I really wanted to get to know the other person to see if I could change their mind. So don't get too worked up. Try to remain calm as you listen to it. It is long. Sometimes it's very difficult to hear the words that are being said. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important. It's important because there are all different types of people who walk throughout society, and they all have different belief systems. Some are closer aligned than others, but everyone is their own person, and they put together their thoughts in a unique way. So it's really, really important that you understand that you're not going to agree all the time. And when you find yourself with somebody that you really don't agree with, that uncomfortable conversation that you have can be turned into something that is constructive, and hopefully something where both people can walk away having learned something. And if you're lucky enough that whatever was learned, actually turns into a changing of a belief or a changing of a habit or something of that nature. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the episode.
So welcome back to another episode of Thinking Critically. Today I have a really interesting something great in store for you, and I'm really, really excited about it because I've been challenged a few times before to kind of go out of my comfort zone, and it's something that I've also talked about on the show before, to go outside of my comfort zone and to have a conversation with somebody that I don't necessarily agree with, to try to find common ground, to listen, to understand, all of that. So today I am joined by Jim Matthews, who is actually the father to Steve Matthews, who I've had on the show before as a local entrepreneur. And today we're going to have a interesting conversation, and we probably won't agree on everything, but that's just kind of how life is. Sometimes you just have to have uncomfortable conversations. So that's what today's episode is all about, and I really, really hope that you enjoy it. Anyway, Jim, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's great to have you on.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. My family's been after me to capture some of this for the longest time, and because I have conversations with them all the time, trying to describe the world as I've seen it through basically 72 years.
Okay.
I grew up on the south side of Chicago in the area that's really called Inglewood now. It was always called Inglewood. It wasn't the same as it is today, but it was always an integrated neighborhood. And through my entire education, my entire school, grammar school, I always went to integrated schools. It was the same school my mother went to. That was an integrated school. Went to high school on the south side of Chicago, and then eventually went into the military. In 1960, in 66, 65, I got out of high school. You didn't have a choice. The draft was still active. A lot of people today don't even know what the draft was, and a lot of them know the diluted version, which is the lottery system that came out later. But in those days, and if you graduated from high school in 1965, by the time you were 19, you would get a letter from the government saying greetings, and they were going to bring you into Vietnam, into the military for Vietnam. During that period, I mean, a lot of decisions were made. My dad was a World War II vet, also POW, captured in France, moved around Europe in cattle cars that weren't marked, strafed by United States aircraft. I mean, it was the whole story that we hear about World War II vets. Didn't say much about it, didn't influence me one way or the other. But when I was 19, I felt it was a sense of duty. I lived in this country, I should pay some dues. And so I didn't avoid the draft in any way. And what I did is I chose my path. I had a job with the Bell system, and they had a program where if you were working there for a year, they would maintain your time and service as seniority and allow you to serve the military and then come back as if you had not left. So when my plan was to leave to work for a year, leave for a period of time, and then come back at another skill level in the company. So it was kind of an engineered plan. I had to serve anyway, so I went into the Air Force for 4 years.
So you were drafted then?
I was not drafted.
Oh, you were not drafted?
I enlisted.
Oh, you enlisted.
I enlisted
okay.
with that plan.
Okay.
That because of the employer that I had, I could work. I had a year seniority with them, and if they would cover me for the amount of time I was in the military and accumulate that seniority. So when I came out, I had 5 years seniority, and by union rules, that put me into another higher paid, higher skill job.
Within the Air Force?
Yeah, well, in the Bell system when I came back.
Oh, in the Bell system.
So that was my motivation for doing this, right?
Okay.
And plus, I was kind of a gearhead at the time, and I felt like it might be interesting working on aircraft. So, although my job at the Bell system had to do with electronics, so I kind of had my choice of both when I enlisted, but I chose electronics. Mechanical. So I was a mechanic. I worked on several different jet fighters, worked on B-52s. I worked on the ejection systems. It was an interesting job because every military aircraft that has an ejection system, that system is probably the most dangerous system on the plane because they have more accidents with it. Where the seat will come out of some of those planes 185 feet in 3/10 of a second. So that if you do that on the ground by mistake, you're done. So the good news was nobody wanted to be around when we were working on that, and it wasn't as bad a job as a lot. It was a good job, although it didn't have much application when I got back. But anyway, in that time, I out of boot camp went to Southeast Asia. I worked at Clark in the Philippines. We were in direct support of Vietnam. We were the depot.
So this was during Vietnam?
During Vietnam.
During Vietnam, okay.
That was in 67 to 68. Was at Clark Air Base. From Clark Air Base, like I said, we supported the aircraft that were in Vietnam, the 509 Fighter Wing. So we had aircraft in 3 sites in Vietnam, 2 sites in Thailand. During my time, I got my first assignment, though, was being deployed to Korea when the Pueblo was taken. So the way the military does that, they have a deployment. You don't really know much about it. A siren goes off. If you're the mobility guy, you show up with your tool bag, your toolbox, and your duffel bag, and they put you on an airplane and send you somewhere. You don't know where you're going. So we didn't know anything about Korea at the time in the Philippines. So at any rate, siren went off. I showed up, put us on a C-141. Had been in 80, 90 degree weather in the Philippines for 6 months. Got off that airplane. It was like 5 degrees, and I was in Gimpo, Korea. So that was in response to when the North Koreans took the Pueblo.
Okay.
We were there for 4 months until there was some certainty as to what the outcome of that was going to be, because it was a full military deployment into Korea, and we were fighting with the weather, and our aircraft were breaking down because of the cold, because they were used to being in hot weather. It was kind of a mess, but after 4 months, the edge was off, and they sent me back. From there, I went back to Clark Air Base for a month.
Is that in the Philippines then?
In the Philippines.
Clark Air Base. Okay.
Yes. Then after about a month, they deployed me to a site we had in Bangkok. We had a site in Bangkok, Thailand, that we used to fly F-102s over the north, so they could check the weather to determine if it was safe for the B-52s to fly. We didn't have like Google Maps and weather maps and all that kind of stuff at the time. We had to send an aircraft up to actually check the weather and radio back whether it was safe to fly these aircraft. So that was our job. Launched those at 2 in the morning, and they would do their business, and then if everything was good, then the heavies would go. So that was actually pretty good duty, though, because that was right in Bangkok, and it was actually the international airport for Thailand at the time. So it was good duty.
Yeah, and how long? Okay, so you were in the Philippines, then you were stationed in Korea, then you went to Thailand. You said.
Yeah.
Or I should say Korea back to Philippines, then to Thailand. How long were you in Thailand for?
Our rotations were around 48 days.
48 days? Okay.
Roughly, yeah, between that.
And then you would just go back to the Philippines? Like the base in the Philippines was the home base?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and while I was in Korea, they were having the Tet Offensive in 1968 at Bien Hoa, Vietnam, which would have been another choice for me, but I wasn't allowed to go because my training wasn't complete yet. So at any rate, but when I came back to the Philippines, I was there about less than a month, and then I did rotate to Bien Hoa and Vietnam. So I was in Vietnam for a little less than 2 months, and same thing, maintaining the ejection systems on the aircraft there, and we were just another fighter squadron there, flying support for the ground troops, right? When I always looked at it like I was at the top of the food chain, right? It was like, I was on an air base. I was protected. The Army was maintaining the perimeter, but when the Army would get dug in, guess what? They would have to call for air support. Air Force would come in and take care of them. And then if the planes got shot up, well, then they had to use my ejection seat to get out and save themselves. So that's how I always got over it. Is I kind of like, it was amusing to me.
So then you actually never saw any combat then. You were just you were more or less the one who maintained the aircraft to make sure that everything was operational.
Yes. I didn't carry a gun. We had our M16s were locked in a steel cabinet called a Connex. We would take them out every month and check the magazines and whatever, but we did not carry them.
Okay.
But we were on an air base, and because Tet had been happened, it was such a big deal in January and February of '68. That they were still flying the Puff, the C-47s with the miniguns around our perimeter. We used to like to go watch that. We would get 122 millimeter rockets or mortars occasionally, they would launch them into the base, and you'd run down to the bunker. That we had that going on. I mean, we weren't in the field, but that's what we had, and it was not often. But there was a time where they did hit an ammo dump actually at Bien Hoa and lit the whole place up. It was a massive destruction. But so even though every day we didn't have contact, we were still there.
Okay.
All right. So then after that tour was over, I went back to the Philippines. I was there a month or two, and then they sent me back to Bangkok again. I was there another month or two, then back to the Philippines, and then from there rotated back to the States and went to Grand Forks, North Dakota, where I worked on B-52s that were loaded with nuclear weapons. So that was, and then after 2 years, 2 more years, I was out, and then back to the phone company. So that was, so in that 4 years, it kind of hardens you a little bit, kind of develops level of risk tolerance that you can take, and level of flexibility, living out of a bag for a year and a half and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't.
So,
I mean, I've personally never seen combat or never enlisted in the military myself, so I don't know exactly what that's like. Well, I mean, I know with today it's it's obviously slightly different. I know we have conflict in the Middle East and whatnot, but back then, you had the mandatory draft, and then of course you had conflicts not only in Vietnam, then you had Korea. I'm not terribly good with my history, so I'm not sure how close those two conflicts were to one another. What came first, and then what came second between Vietnam and Korea? But I know it's the same area of the world.
Yeah, well, the original Korean conflict was in the mid-50s, right? Shortly after World War II, and then that was never declared a war. And then what I was there for was just a little rogue incident.
Oh, I see.
Where the North Koreans seized one of our ships. They claimed it was a spy ship. That ship is still in North Korea. We never got it back. It's still there, but we did get the crew back.
Okay.
And we were sent there because there was a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know. They stole the ship. They had an American crew, and we didn't know if we were going to go to war or not. That was the situation. So it just builds your tolerance to situations. I think going through that, I mean, that's what it did for me. And it lets you compartmentalize things in your mind, know what's important and what's not.
Okay.
Knows when you should be angry and when you should not be angry. I've coached my kids on that. I said, you don't know the level of escalation you can go to with anger. So since you don't know that, don't even start. That's my advice on that. So I don't get angry, and part of it's because of that. So,
and would you say you learned that from the military?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, also from the Korean thing, there was so much uncertainty that there was a guy that had been a few more years in, and he told me that during the original Korean War in the 50s, what had happened is the North Koreans came over and they invaded at night, and there were like 13 Americans hanging in the hangar at the air base that I was at. I mean, that was the first thing, and more guys died in the original Korean conflict from the weather, from the environment, really, than from battle wounds, because it's very harsh country, very harsh weather. So I learned that, and that's when I went to Vietnam, where I was in another kind, I didn't really overreact. If, for instance, if a round would come in, I knew to get my boots on, get my clothes on, then go down to the bunker, because it was in my mind, I would say it's unlikely that next round's going to hit my barracks. If it doesn't hit my barracks, I'm fine. So take my time, go down there prepared. So that's the way I approach everything. I don't get rattled by it. So that did that for me. So going to work, went back to work, got married while I was still in the military. Went back to work at the phone company like I had planned. Got that career, that job change I was anticipating. But then at some point I decided I wanted to be in the IT world. So the nice part about working in a big corporation, a lot of people don't have this advantage today, is the large companies like AT&T and Illinois Bell was the branch that I was in. They would let you train and promote from within. So I went from being a high school graduate that went to that was in a craft job. It was called a mainframe. It was called, where you connected basically the old landlines from the phone in somebody's house to the wiring in the central office where they got switched. That was my first job. And then I did a lot of cable transfers where we converted several neighborhoods from dial pulse to touch tone. Did that job. Because I was a little more mature when I got back out, so they were able to put me into jobs like that. And then very shortly after that, though, I heard about the electronic switching going and decided to get into that. That was the first computer-driven telephone switch. Okay. And then that got me into this, realizing I wanted to be in IT itself. So then my entire career after that was in IT. So I spent 31 years in Illinois Bell. Left there, went to combat for 5 years. Left those were like director level jobs that I got to in each one of those companies. But then I went to the state of Illinois as a chief information officer. I worked there for 3 years, but initially not as an employee, initially as a contractor. Rod Balgojevich was there. And I got to see what that showed me was, I knew Rod's administration. I knew what they were doing. I had the highest IT job in the state at the time, and my job was to save money. So,
this is when you're working for Illinois Bell still?
This is, remember I said I worked 31 years at Illinois Bell. Then I went to work 5 years at ComEd. Then I went to the state of Illinois.
Okay, so you're working at the state of Illinois now?
Yes.
When you have the highest, what you're talking about right now, the highest IT job?
In the state of Illinois. The chief information officer is generally the highest. The states have many chief information officers, but I was in the one that was in the governor's office that the other ones had to fold up to.
Okay.
So and the goal there was for a special initiative. That's why I was a contractor. The governor wanted to save $100 million because there was a children's program, a child health care program that he was trying to start up. And rather than do a tax increase, he was told by the consultants that he had hired that he could probably raise this $100 million just by optimizing the IT department. And that was my specialty. So I was brought in there. And we did it. We actually, within a year, a little over a year of reconfiguring things and consolidating agencies into one agency within the state, we had reduced the cost to $130 million a year. And we put in a governance protocol that would allow them to basically avoid bad decisions in IT. It was a protocol they had to go through. That maintained years and years even after I left. So I'm very proud of that. But in that time frame, I'm also proud of the fact that we saved that $130 million by breaking down a lot of bad deals as well. Plus, I got to experience all the lobbyists and political people that come in. We were very much apolitical there. They didn't care what we were. We weren't Democrats, and never came up. But we did the job. But the amount of interference from lobbyists and businesses that come in trying to sell stuff, it's you can see how people get in trouble and how bad deals happen within the state.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's not just a state thing. You've got lobbyists
all
on the national,
all the government, and it's because these people are not spending their own money. That's why they are not spending their own money. They're spending taxpayers' money, even if they don't have it. They're spending it because it gets them perks. It makes them important. It makes them feel like they have a little bit of power. And that's how they operate.
Well, are you talking about politicians or the lobbyists? I'm
talking about the politicians that the lobbyists
try to that they lobby, that they try to win over.
So that was my taste of the public sector. I've been private sector up to there, and I got to see this kind of silliness that was going on all the time. Although from the governor's office, we never got any interference. So when a deal we realized it was a bad deal. And we would put a target on it to change it one way or the other, either consolidate it or eliminate it or renegotiate it to get the cost down. We never got any interference from the governor's office, which to me meant that they were basically honest. There was basically, because if they had been dishonest, we would have got a call saying basically, well, leave that one alone. We'll take care of it, because they were still our boss. Never happened, not once. So I'm very confident in the fact that what we did there had a lot of integrity. Was never any political involvement. We saved the state $130 million a year. We put them on a better foot. But then I never planned to be in government. I mean, there were some things about it I really did not like. And so after we were confident, after 3 years, we decided that it was good, we could go. It was on its own legs. And then I went to work for another large communications company, and I was their vice president of architecture and strategy. So I did that until I retired.
What communications company? I'm sorry.
Charter.
Okay.
Charter Communications.
So this was after you worked for Illinois.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's been my background, and it's given me a lot of exposure. I've spoke. I mean, after I left the state, the work there was so remarkable that I was even sponsored to go to Australia to talk to their people about how we did that. So it was pretty well done, pretty well received. Very proud of that. And
well, you should be. I mean, that's a pretty impressive feat, saving the state $130 million a year by going in and essentially restructuring how that particular sector of the government was run.
Yeah, but I learned some things. I mean, I learned like we had as we had these employees, and we were. we had to turn it back over to the career employees, right? Once we got it where we wanted it, we knew we were leaving, we did a transition plan to get it back to the career employees. So we identified the ones we thought had the most integrity, were the most useful. As we got to know them, we asked things like, well, why do you like this job? I mean, you could make more money going outside. And I'd get answers like, well, we get a little power. And it just hit me the wrong way. I said, power over who? You're a public servant. Why do you think you have power? Mm-hmm. But that's the attitude they have. The other thing we ran into when we first walked in the door into the state, there's a cult within government organizations. They call themselves the Weebies.
The Weebies?
Weebies, yeah.
I'm not familiar.
And so we asked, so what's a Weebie? We don't know what that is, you know. Weebie here when you're gone, because they know that every time an administration comes in, they bring their cabinet as appointees, right? And when the elections, when the term is over for that elected official, all the appointees go away. So the career employees know they can wait you out.
But they can do what?
Wait you out.
Oh, okay.
So that's what
wait
they mean to
out.
say, we be here when you're gone.
I see.
That's a weebie. So those guys exist in every government organization, including the Fed. So that's why there's so much inefficiency in the government. There's so much back scratching. There's so much resistance to actually getting things finished because they want it to perpetuate. That's what I learned in 3 years in the government.
Okay.
So from there, at Charter, they were in bankruptcy when I went there because this was my strategy. My specialty was to fix things. So we took them out of bankruptcy, and you know they reissued their stock, and through great management on their part, they reissued that stock at $30 a share. It's now over 400. So that was another good job, and I had retired, you know, after being there about 10 years, after getting it where I wanted it, and they made a lot of progress since with a couple mergers. So that's you know, that's kind of my work history, and so I think I've had a lot of exposure and a lot of experience in that because it was multiple companies, multiple types of organizations, public and private, and even a little taste of the political. Mm-hmm. But one takeaway from after the state when the government went after Balgojevich, I felt like that was like what I read about in the Cold War as what the gulags would do when they found somebody. They called it, I called it a gulag mentality, where if they didn't like what you were doing politically, they put you away. And that's what I believe happened to. I believe he went through the system. He was indicted. But he was indicted twice.
Okay.
They prosecuted him the first time. It didn't stick. They changed a few words. It did stick. They put him away. 15 years. They said that he was trying to get money. He wasn't getting money. I knew that. I tell everybody this because he was fundamentally honest when I was there, and never interfered with anything we did to actually reduce cost and save the state money.
So Balgojevich was the individual or the governor at the time then?
Yes, he was.
When you did the restructuring?
Yes,
Yeah.
and he was put away, and that let me believe how scary the government can be, and we're seeing a lot of that today.
Well, why do you think then that Balgojevich was essentially the sacrificial lamb, so to speak, in this scenario?
Because the Democrat Party had, Rod, I believe, this is my opinion, I believe he had aspirations to be a presidential candidate. He was well-spoken, he's articulate, he was very presentable, you know, and you see he's got a strong heart because of the way he emerged from prison, he emerged strong. But he was in there for what, 13 or 14 years. Who goes, and what they said is he was, because he made a comment about when the Democrat Party named Barack Obama as the presidential candidate, he said, I got to get something for that. That's what they trapped him on the phone. My interpretation is that was he wanted another Democrat in the Senate so that he could maintain his political power.
Balgojevich?
Yeah, that's what he meant by that comment.
Okay.
But they kind of turned that comment to make people believe he was soliciting money. I don't believe that, simply because I know what his behavior was like when I was there. But I saw him go away for 14 years. Who goes away for 14 years? They don't even go away for 14 years for murder in this country. But he spent that time, and he got pardoned by President Trump, and he's out. So So that's, but seeing that injustice, to me, it was unjust the way they did that, because they took basically the same offense and they repackaged it the second time that they went through the court. And to me, that could be interpreted as double jeopardy, prosecute him for the same crime. And
because
so,
you're saying that the two were almost identical.
Yeah,
they
it was
changed
the
a few
same
things,
thing,
so
they
it wasn't
changed.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was almost the same crime.
Yeah, so they just wanted him
prosecuted.
out of the way. It was the Democrat Party put him away. That was
Okay.
it, because it was interfering with their strategy. So anyway, that gets me to where I am, and you know, and a lot of what's going on today, what's so annoying to me, as I mentioned first on, that, you know, I lived in integrated neighborhoods my entire life. So I didn't have to be bussed, and I didn't have to be told I had to sit with a black person. I always did. In fact, I know a couple famous ones. Have you ever been to Olive Park in Chicago? Olive Park, have you ever been there?
I've never been there, no.
It's down by the pumping station where the waterworks are in Navy Pier. That's named after Milton Olive. He was the first Presidential Medal of Honor in Vietnam. He was a classmate of mine when I was in grammar school. I just recently, a good friend of mine passed away. He was a Tuskegee Airman. So he was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. Have you heard about them at all, Tuskegee Airmen?
Tuskegee Airmen. It sounds familiar, but I don't know the
it was an
intricacies
all-black
and details. Okay.
It was a part of the Army at the time, combat squadron, that was used to protect bombers as they went over Europe. And their legacy is that they never lost a bomber. They were that good of an escort squadron to protect these bombers. So they're pretty famous. And President Bush, actually, I think he's the one that finally acknowledged them officially and brought them to Washington, D.C. Now, there were several acknowledgments of them after that. But prior to that, nobody knew much about them. But I knew him because Jack was my buddy at the yacht club. And when he passed away, he was in his 90s, and he still would sail his boat in Lake Michigan solo. That's the kind of integrity he had. That's the kind of wherewithal he had. And he was my friend. So I've had these great friends that you know, were black. And so I don't, you know, I take everybody as an individual. I don't, but, you know, I also have to acknowledge that my neighborhood in Chicago, my original house, is still standing at 57th and Loomis. It's one of a handful of houses that's still standing on 57th and Loomis, because they've all been burned down. They've all been burned down because of the shift in the population that occurred basically during the 60s. In the mid-60s, they changed the welfare residency law in the state of Illinois that allowed anybody that could get an address in the state of Illinois to get a welfare check. That drew thousands of people from the South. They were called freedom buses.
I'm sorry, freedom what?
Freedom buses.
Freedom buses.
Because they came in buses.
Okay.
From the South to get into Illinois to get a check. Now, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to, you know, try to qualify their state of destitution or why they did that or whatever. But I mean, it's an opportunity. So they came here, and through you know, and most of them weren't prepared really to live in the city of Chicago, and they're kind of disruptive. But then the government came out with the Federal Housing Authority, and was issuing FHA loans, and eventually it got to the point where people that didn't have the financial means to own a home were being allowed to purchase a home, and then in most cases it didn't end well. And that resulted in a ton of homes being purchased by unqualified people and foreclosures and neighborhoods destroyed. That's what happened to the south side of Chicago.
This is in the 2000s then?
This was in the 60s.
Oh, this was in the 60s. Okay.
This was in the 60s, and
Okay.
this is what caused what Michelle Obama likes to make a joke about, white flight, right? Which is because as people vacated because their neighborhood was getting dangerous for them. Guess why? I mean, it wasn't because people really were offended by blacks. It was just they didn't like their house getting broken into. And
They didn't what?
Didn't like their house getting broken into and their kids being intimidated at school. And you know, I lived there until I went in the military, so I lived through that whole transition, and I got to see what happened. My brothers would comment to me that it was safer for me in Vietnam than it was in the neighborhood at that point in the 1960s. That's what led white people, to leave the city and move to the suburbs. That's what grew all the suburbs around Chicago. And that's what ate away at the core of the city. That's why Englewood is not the Englewood I grew up in. It was because government causes market distortions by interjecting money into places where either the people aren't mature enough to handle the money or responsible enough, or the theft that goes on by opportunists that decide how they can use that money to engorge themselves. For instance, it was really not the fault. It was not really the fault of the blacks and the low-income whites that were moved into those houses. It wasn't their fault because they saw an opportunity. They thought they were entitled to it. They took advantage of it, but they couldn't sustain it because they weren't qualified. They didn't have the training. They didn't have the income to sustain the payment. Basically, with the FHA loan, they'd say, $200, you can buy this house, and no down payment. And most of them defaulted, and that's why the properties went into foreclosure. But it was actually the establishment, the white realtors that were making all those deals, taking advantage of the Federal Housing Authority to put money in the hands of people that were just going to destroy the neighborhood.
What's really interesting about this is I had no idea that happened in the 60s, but I know that it did happen in the 2000s.
Because it continues to happen.
Yeah. So you have people, what's really interesting is, whether or not you find yourself more conservative or more liberal, Democrat, Republican, is I've observed that human beings are, unfortunately, we have low integrity individuals in all aspects of life, and it seems like whatever system that we design, people are going to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And that all that you can do is to try and minimize. Like, say the idea is really good, it sounds good on paper, and you can't really think of any reason to not do it. And then in implementation, people start taking advantage of it, which is to be expected, and you probably planned for this, but then you try to just minimize it, right? You can never really get rid of it, it seems like.
Well, one of the actions that was taken to try to mitigate it was a lot of churches in the area would have these sessions where they would invite people in that were thinking about buying a house in the neighborhood, and they would tutor them basically in the trials and tribulations of homeownership. Like, you got to make your payments, you got to make your utility payments. Your roof leaks, you got to fix it. There's all kinds of things that come up when you own property, and people that are just like, well, I'm here, I'm going to give me a house, and they're just happy to move in. They don't understand the responsibility they're taking on.
Yep.
That's what the issue was, and so so a lot of the churches in that were setting up these sessions where people could come in and they could give them a session and say, look, if you're going to buy this house, all right, we don't care if you come here, but understand this. This is what you got to do. You got to cut the grass. You got to paint the house. You got to take care of the house. And the number of applications went way down because, well, once that was made obvious, they didn't have so many people applying. So that tells me that it was really the oversell by the realtors that were just trying to go ahead and negotiate the loan, because guess what? The person's going to pay their $200, get their down payment. The Fed is going to back the loan. The person is going to get in there. They'll live there about a year. The bank will foreclose on the property. The Fed will lose all the money. The Fed's going to guarantee the loan back to the bank, so the bank gets their money back, right? But guess what? The taxpayer pays, because the taxpayer underwrote all that because it was a federal program. And so the people that were buying those homes were just useful tools, really, for those.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's exactly what happened in the 2000s as well, when you have the initiative to get more people into homes. And my cousin was a realtor at the time, making great money, and his boss was like, just bring me paper. So he was writing a ton of mortgages for people that he knew would never be able to repay it, and making just gobs of money doing it. And then, of course, this leads to 2008. And I'm not justifying his behavior, and I'm not certainly justifying the behavior of the realtors that engage in this behavior in the 60s, but it is unfortunate.
So you've seen it, And so guess what? Where did that money come from then that the government underwrote those loans with? It came from the taxpayer. And so that's the problem. The problem is when the government comes up with makes all these promises and promise you anything. I mean, it's kind of funny. When we were little kids, and so I've given you my whole history, so I can go back to now. When we were little kids, one of my best friends, and this kid, we were friends till high school. We were probably 10 years old. And because of what we knew about communism, basically because we heard it every day, we still did air raid like we were little kids, 10 years old, the siren would go off, we jump under our desk. Because that's what they learned in World War II. In Europe, that's what happened. When they started bombing, the ceilings were gonna come in. So they were training kids my age when we were in school, siren goes off, you jump under the desk. That was common. Kind of lost my train of thought on that.
Well, you're talking about communism. You're talking about like government overreach.
Yeah.
Perhaps something along those lines.
Yeah. Oh God. Let me get back.
Sure. No worries.
Because it was. So anyway, so we were aware of this, and my little friend Rich, he was my best friend. He would quote. I remember him clear as day. Communism, promise them anything, give them nothing. We're 10 years old saying that. We knew it. And when I was at the state of Illinois, I saw these programs that kept being introduced. The worst programs, in our opinion, when we were there, were the human services programs, because they were every time they wanted and every time a program would come in to our governance system, which meant when you wanted to create a new computer system, you had to come in and basically justify it and say, all right, what is it going to do? What's the benefit? What's the cost? What's the schedule? We had that was part of our governance protocol to try to eliminate problems. So it was always one of three things they'd say: children will die, old people won't get their checks, or officers will be killed. If we don't do this program, that's what it's going to be. And finally we heard that so many times. Finally, I started saying, you know what? Until you can tell me their name, I'm not going to worry about it, because this is just. It's kind of what they've been doing recently on the news. It's always a nameless victim that they want to bring up, And speaking in platitudes and ambiguity, they're never concise. It's always to pull that heartstring, right?
Well, the news these days is 10-second sound bites, and it's just anything to really, really elicit an emotional response out of the audience to get you captivated by that. And like you said, tug on the heartstrings. Yeah, it's really directed straight toward your emotional center. And it's mostly fear-based, in my opinion. And I have a hard time with the news these days in general. And I see that coming from both the conservative and liberal news outlets.
Yeah, and I attribute, I attribute my attitude toward it, again, kind of to the military, being able to separate concerns and understand what's really important, what's not important, what's going to kill you, what's not going to kill you. It's black and white to me to make those decisions. And so when I see the nonsense on the news, I just have to look at it and say, wow, I can't believe people believe this stuff. But what I have learned, when I've told a person, I had a friend of mine, as a coworker actually, he was an Indian, he was from India. And he knew I was a Vietnam vet. And he said, so tell me, why were you guys there anyway? I said, honestly, I can't tell you. All I can say was my duty to go because my government told me to go. But if you ask me today, with what I know today, should I have been there? And I said, probably not. Because when I was a member, it was started by Kennedy, and then it was escalated by LBJ, two Democrats. And it was known that LBJ was making a ton of money. His family was making a ton of money off his investments and whatever was going on during that war.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think a similar argument can be made about what happened in Iraq when Bush became president.
Yes.
Yeah, that there are people in government who are, low integrity.
Yeah.
That's something, and that I think that you would see that in either party, unfortunately.
Yes.
And then
right.
It's just the public's responsibility to essentially call them out on it, to hold them responsible for their low integrity moves, actions, and it shouldn't be tolerated.
Well, they're criminal, really, because if
Yeah.
they were in the private sector, that would be called insider trading. Actually, to pass a law or to create a situation that's going to cause the need in the market, and then to buy the stock before that is before that's made public,
Yep.
and then let that stock boom. Right? A lot of them did that in this Corona thing with the PPE. A lot of them, some of them even stepped down as a result of it.
They sure did.
And so this has been going on, and there's no reason that, the only reason Congress isn't held to that standard is because they write the laws. They won't write that law for themselves about insider trading. That's absolutely insider trading and shouldn't be permitted. So, how does Barack Obama, he was a $90,000 a year street organizer when he became an Illinois senator, right? He did part of term as a senator. When he became a senator, his wife was working at University of Chicago. Did you know that? I mean,
I did not.
She had a legit job. She was working at the University of Chicago, and she actually came up with a program that was pretty good. She was making about $130,000, I think, something like that. I mean, she had a decent job at the University of Chicago. She came up with a program that would take people that were coming into the University of Chicago emergency room and bust them out of there into some ghetto clinics.
Into some what clinics?
Ghetto clinics.
Oh.
Some in the associated neighborhood, like some, because they wanted them out of the University of Chicago waiting room.
So you're talking about the hospital?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in the emergency room.
In the emergency room.
And it was the right thing to do, really. But it's almost like. It's almost what somebody that was. You look at it and you say, why would you bust them out of the University of Chicago where they're going to get the best service into some substandard place? Why? Because the University of Chicago had to save money. I mean, they couldn't afford all these people coming in with a toothache into the emergency room. So they would queue them up, and that was I guess that was one of her programs. This is what I've heard. And
So that was to save money then?
Save money for the University of Chicago. Yeah,
Okay.
make it more efficient. So I agree with that.
Yeah, you can't overwhelm the healthcare system with toothaches.
But
the emergency room.
So I don't know. But shortly after Barack was made a congressman for the state of Illinois, her salary went up over $300,000 a year. So it was just a connection. It was a political connection. So we got this king. We made him. We street organizer. We made him a senator. In the state of Illinois, speaks well, presents well. He's our next presidential candidate, right? Because he never finished his term as a senator, right? Before they had him as a presidential candidate. He never had any experience. Her salary goes up 300, because now they're making him wealthy so they could fit into the profile. Remember the Resco, Tony Resco got involved with them buying their property in Bridgeport. They had a big home, well, not Bridgeport, I'm sorry, in it's not Bridgeport. Yeah, I guess it is Bridgeport.
So I mean, I just want to circle back. So are you? I mean, you see this all the time. It's not just what
Right.
happened with the Obamas,
Right.
where you have people who then move into the private sector, the public sector, into some sort of higher up position, and then all of a sudden they're making a lot of money. And of course, that's being funded by the taxpayer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's part of making a king. I mean, if he wasn't making good money, then he couldn't be a presidential candidate. So that was part of it. So it was all creating this person, right? So when you see when you see these things, of course you have to be disgusted by it in a lot of ways. I mean, it's taxpayer money. It's misrepresentation of what the funds are going to be used for, and then when they get in, of course, they owe everybody. So because this $90,000 a year guy now is worth over $40 million, him and his wife. And
they made a lot of money. I'm not going to sit here and I won't justify the behavior, but it is a systemic problem that you see this all the time, and it's regardless of Democrats or Republicans, where you have people going into government and then all of a sudden they're worth a significantly large sum more than they were before they went in. And of course, their salary increases. So for example, I think when you become president, I think you make like $400,000 or $450,000 a year. That's a good chunk of change. So just taking that, and I don't know what expenses you have while you're president of the United States, because I don't think you actually have to pay to live in the White House. I don't know if you have to pay for your food and things of that nature. So I think there's all these, ancillary perks that come along with it. So you're essentially putting all of this money into your bank. And then, like you said too, though, the connections that you're making. For a long time, you have politicians inside trading. Also, another trend too is that, like, if you want to be a CEO of a large corporation, the best place to go is to go and work in Washington, D.C. and make the connections, because those are the people that you need to know if you want to.
Contract.
Yeah, you have to. I wouldn't say it's solely a government contract, but a lot of the large corporations, of course. I think it's fair to say, and give me your opinion, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, that the government, along with the private sector, that there's a lot of intertwining these days, particularly with the lobbyists and all of that. So that we have, the public sector, the government is supposed to be looking out for the best interest of the public. And then the private sector's role is to provide goods and services, and the sole reason that a corporation exists is to maximize profits, essentially. To provide a good and service, maximize profits. And then the government has to make sure that that corporation is essentially not hurting people and staying within the bounds of reason, so to speak. That's why we have regulations and things of that nature.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, what I always stress with my own kids and anybody I have this discussion with, corporations, basically I have words for corporations as well, if I can say it, playgrounds for a-holes. I mean, it can be that, right? But you know what? I say that's fine. It's up to the shareholders and the board to manage that. If they see that going on, because their shareholder is the one whose money they're wasting or putting in jeopardy. So if you got a clown running an organization, then he's putting their investment at risk. He needs to be managed by his managers. But the government's different. The government just reaches into your wallet and takes your money regardless, and you don't have much to say about it, and they do with it what they want.
Well, I think we do have something to say, and that is with our right to vote. So the way that I look at it is that at the end of the day, it's the public's responsibility to hold both the private sector along with the government accountable. So you vote with your dollar. So if you don't agree with a private corporation's business practices, you don't like their product that they offer, you don't like the fact that they exploit child labor in a third world country, or that they overly pollute the environment, then you stay away from their product and you vote with your dollar. Yeah. If you don't like what a government politician is doing, then you don't vote for them at the ballot box. So I think that there is still some power, that the government doesn't have unlimited power, that there is something still that the public can do, and that's to exercise your right to vote.
Right, but the issue I think we have is that it takes a lot of energy to keep an eye on what the government's doing. They're running at such a pace these days that you can't, it's difficult. It's difficult. And so you pick an area that you're interested in, I guess. But again, it's when you get into taxing and public funds, though, where there needs to be a lot more governance, a lot more oversight. And then I look at, for instance, Congress has been after Trump for his taxes for how long, right? Well, my answer to that is, you got a whole bureau called the IRS. If they didn't catch him, what are you going to do? Why are you going to dig into it? If they let him get away with it, then you go talk to them, because they're the one that's supposed to be watching all these guys to see if, and they got a big army there of people that are there, and they are a big pain in the ass to most people, but it's not up to Congress to be digging into that stuff because it's political food for them. It's like, if you don't like what happened, then talk to the IRS. Find out what happened. These agencies have to be accountable for the job that they're supposed to do. And the fact that they get immunity, they're entitled to such a level of immunity when there's a mistake made. Like the EPA a couple of years ago, I forgot the details of it, but they were mining somewhere and they polluted a river in I think it was in Colorado somewhere. They just caused this huge landslide because they were doing something stupid. Nobody went to jail for that. Nobody got fined for that. EPA, do what they want. So
there was no accountability?
None.
Okay.
None.
I'm not familiar with this situation, so I don't know how it all played out. But yeah, I mean, of course, to not hold at least a few individuals accountable with some sort of reprimand of some variety. I don't know the details.
Yeah, well, I mean, then there would probably be some fall guy, because that's the way it would work. It wouldn't be wouldn't be the one that told him to go do that. Yeah.
I'm super curious though. If we'll circle back to President Trump and his tax returns.
Okay, you bet.
So, I know that he ran his campaign on saying that he'd be happy to release his tax returns, and then that was something that he never did. Now, is that at all concerning to you? I know you just made the comment that, it's political fodder essentially for Congress to go after it, but do you think that it's somewhat suspicious that the president ran his campaign on saying, hey, you can look at my taxes public, it's fine, and then he never did it? And above and beyond that, even when you have certain members within Congress then, so the Democrats going after his tax returns to release them to the public, actively fighting them, like hiring his suite of lawyers and things of that nature.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think it's political theater. I'm really not interested in it. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
It's number one. If the IRS, put it this way, if I looked at these tax records or tax returns, I doubt I'd be able to interpret it. It's very complicated. I'm sure there's a lawyer, there's an army of accountants that, with all his properties and all his interests, that even submit those in the first place. And I don't know if you've ever been audited, but I've been audited once or twice, and you call the IRS for an opinion, and they will not give you a definitive opinion about if this is right or it's wrong. So this is quite subjective. This kind of goes back to the laws that are made. What they call laws, they're not laws. I mean, they're rules. The only laws that exist are really God's laws, physics. Those are the only laws. I mean, hot air will rise for everybody, water will run downhill for everybody.
Oh, yeah, of course. The laws that we operate with, speed limits, things like that, that's something that they are fictions, right? They are something that human beings have created in order to create a more civil society, create order, things of that nature. And, a similar thing exists for our currency. Or why is it that gold is as valuable as it is, or silver is, and it's because it's a precious resource. But then something, for example, like when we moved away from those hard elemental standards for money into fiat currency, which is that, we just kind of all agree, like if I were to take $20 out of my bill, I mean, its intrinsic value is that it's really just paper that I could burn for 5 seconds, right? I can't eat it. I could probably use that as fire starter or something like that.
Yeah.
But it has value in the marketplace just because you and I agree on it. So that's just a fiction, essentially, that you and I kind of bond over. You can make the same argument for religion as well. However, when it comes to like laws, like you said, the legal infrastructure of like this country and other countries and whatnot, that is just something that people have argued over for decades and maybe hundreds of years, and said, okay, well, in order to make society better, we should do this, and then.
Well, this is why you need fewer rules that apply to everybody. That's what you need. And so since they're not capable, and in fact there's even, and I don't know where this is written, but and it should be written in a manner that any average person can interpret it. So you don't need a lawyer to interpret it for you. That's the goal. So, but they're written deliberately complex. Like Affordable Care Act was deliberately complex, just so that it takes that capability away. So it can be left for interpretation later. It's never anything definitive about it. So it's really not a law. It's just
but I mean, we do have. So, for example, you were talking about the Affordable Care Act. So that particular bill was very long and complex. I categorically agree with you on that, absolutely. But then, don't you have lawyers who, on both sides, who are analyzing it and trying to communicate it to the public?
But you see, I'm not a fan of lawyers. I mean,
okay.
I'm just not. So to me, if you didn't have one, you wouldn't need any. True.
But I mean, as society has gotten increasingly more complex, though, I mean, we have certain members of society who become experts in certain domains in order to help us function, because I mean, you can't know everything in today's world, right? I mean, it is just way too complex, at least on a deep level. So that's why we have the expert. And I know that there is a certain vulnerability that comes along with admitting that you cannot know everything and then having to rely on an expert in that domain, because you are not that person, right? I think everyone really appreciates like their own personal autonomy, like not having to, I guess, give away what they know, or admit their personal limitations, I should say. But in an increasingly complex society that we live in today, the expert, I think, still has value. And the reason that they exist is just because of the fact that there's just so much to know.
Well, they have value until they don't, when you disagree with their opinion. Then you find another expert, and then you find another expert. That's what it comes down to. So it is useful to try to be responsible for the decisions you make. You know, and I mean, what if you hire that expert and they give you bad advice, and you if you have hire somebody to do some work on your house and they do a bad job.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, all experts are not made the same, right? There's no sort of carbon copy. Everyone's a unique individual.
This is an American trait, though.
What's that?
This is part of an American trait of individualism and independence.
Okay.
See, it is really, and it's the only place in the world where that exists. You know, it was meant to exist anyway. And more, your ability to be that way is being taken away by constraints put on you by rules and whatever that the government puts in place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there is something to be said about, obviously, being an individual, right? And I think everyone values being an individual and, going about their day making decisions for themselves, which they think are the best decisions for themselves. But I think it's important to admit that we live in a society that is becoming increasingly more connected. And that, what may be good for me may actually not be like the best decision for everyone, like long term or something of that nature. So for example, let's take global warming, okay? So global warming has been verified by the scientific community. So there's like 98% agreement within the scientific community. They formed something known as a scientific consensus, which is that throughout the decades, all of this research was done and all of the evidence points to this singular conclusion that humans are exacerbating the warming of the planet. Okay, I don't know if you acknowledge that or not, but we don't have to go into that. Let's just say you do, okay, for right now. So let's say you acknowledge that. And I'm talking about the collective behavior again. So if you acknowledge that, then that means that as an individual, there are certain things perhaps that you should be doing in order to benefit the entire planet moving forward.
So let me ask you about that, though. Let me ask you about science.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer.
Do you know what the scientific method is?
I do, yeah.
What would you say?
So it is a process of hypothesizing, and then you formulate first you make an observation, then you hypothesize, which is essentially, I know I hate to phrase it as an educated guess, but it is the guess or the question that you put forward that you'd like to answer based off of all of your available evidence or experience, I should say. And then you go forward and you formulate an experiment, and then you test it, and you see what comes out the other end.
Every day, the science is this and the science is that, these politicians. Science to me is all about, it is like you said, it's hypothesis, experimentation, evaluation of results. And then at some point, you're always trying to break your proof. You're always trying to find an exception to that. Because you don't know if you know what you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So there's always but what they're claiming is definitive science. I don't agree with much of it. There's been quite a lot of fraud. I mean, in terms of that's been called out on the papers that have been written, the positions that have been taken. But guess what? Because it's a business. There's a lot of government money there. There's another government distortion created by it because a lot of money, and here come the here come the people get that money. That's what it's all about.
No, I mean I agree that science is not a perfect enterprise, that like any other aspect of human society, you're always going to have people looking to get ahead by low integrity means. However, that being said, I mean, it's not just government money. You have the nonprofit sector. You also have the private sector that's very interested in investing money into fundamental research as well.
Well, they're willing to. The private sector is willing to invest. If they, you know what, they can do that. I mean, Elon Musk, he can do that. He can do it. He's spending his money. He can do what he wants with his cars and his batteries and all that kind of stuff, and he's making a lot of progress. But it's his money, and he'll be rewarded for it. And he is being rewarded for it if it all works out. But when they take your tax dollar money, tax dollars, and go into a level of uncertainty, I mean, how much risk should they be taking with our money? I mean, look at the Solyndra deal that.
Yes, that is certainly an area for individuals to debate over, is how to judiciously take the taxpayers' money and use it towards science. However, I mean, I think there have been studies done. Okay, so don't quote me on this, and I would have to look more into this. But if you look at the returns just from NASA alone, the fundamental research and the amazing technologies that have come from NASA is a government organization, so that's all taxpayer funded. You look at what that has done for society and the technologies that have come out of that and trickled into the private sector, and then the private sector then is incorporating that and making money off of it. I mean, I think there's a very strong argument to be made for government investing into science. Now, where exactly you draw that line, I mean, that is, I don't have an answer for that. But I do certainly support the government going out and spending taxpayer money on science, because I have seen the returns to society from that. And I mean, I know that science is a complicated process. It's very difficult. It takes many years of training in order to become a scientist. But if you look at all the incredible technologies that we have today, it is a result of the scientific method. The microphone that's recording the sound here, the cameras that are picking it up, I mean, that all started with fundamental research. So some individual or groups of individuals getting together and saying, we just are curious about the universe, let's see what we can find out. And then at some point, the results of that science were taken, and then it was used by engineers to make wonderful technologies to improve our lives. I mean, if you look at the advances in human civilization since the onset of the scientific enlightenment, it's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable.
I don't disagree with that. It's just that it needs to be bound to a point where you say, because when I worked at the state, we started saying, because we were reducing cost, right? We started saying, do more with less. Do more with less. That's easy to roll off your mouth. But the more we got to know the state, we said, no, it should be do less with less. The government's role is not to expand into everything of our private life. It's just not the government's role. Now, I agree that the space program was amazing, and I believe there's some percentage of maybe the tax base that should be used for that sort of development. But I don't believe that the same thing has happened with the green strategies that are out there right now. I know, for instance, the whole strategy around diesel engines is a fraud right now. I know that for sure.
Around the diesel engine?
Oh yeah, it's a fraud. I mean, the current pollution devices that are required on the diesel engines are kind of a Rube Goldberg situation, right? I mean, yeah, it's a fossil fuel engine, right? We learned a while ago that with gasoline engines, you could put when the exhaust gets to be a certain temperature, it makes a lot of nitric oxide waste product, and so they've identified that as some problem in the environment. Okay, so they've been putting catalytic converters on gas cars for gas vehicles for years, right? And all right, they got rid of the nitric oxides, right? So they went after the diesel engines. And they try to put they did that with the EGR, right? They do that with the EGR by cutting down basically the efficiency of the engine, right? It takes exhaust gas, which has got no oxygen left in it, routes that into the intake stream. So it cuts down the temperature that gets created in your combustion chamber. In other words, the power of your combustion. So the power of the engine. So you're going to be burning more fuel to get less power, but that cooler exhaust makes less nitric oxide with the catalytic converter. They did the same thing. They tried to do the same thing with the diesel engine. They tried to put an EGR on it, and when you cool down the temperature of the diesel engine, basically it got more soot.
Okay.
So they cooled down the engine. They got more soot. So then they created, we need this particle filter to grab that. So they created a diesel particulate filter. Now that won't run more than a few hundred miles before it fills up with soot. So they had to come with a regen procedure. They came up with a regen procedure. They dumped raw diesel fuel into the diesel exhaust certain times, certain period while you're driving, brings the exhaust temperature up to 1200 degrees and cooks the stuff out of the catalytic converter, out of the DPF, right? And then guess what? Now the catalytic converter was so hot, the DPF was so hot, it was creating nitric oxides again, the very thing you tried to eliminate by putting the EGR on it in the first place. So then they had a selective catalytic converter behind that. So had they just put the catalytic converter on it in the first place, they probably wouldn't needed any of it. But they'll never go back.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I haven't heard anything about that. I definitely will look more into that.
Trucking companies are dying.
So,
I mean, the amount of time that these trucks are off the road for maintenance and for regens, it's substantial. I mean, a couple of my kids are in the trucking industry, and I know this for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it sounds like it sounds inefficient what you're describing, but I don't really have the background to properly analyze it.
Plus, I own a couple of diesel engines, so
yeah.
I know firsthand.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm really curious then. So based off of everything that we're saying, are you satisfied with the current trajectory of the country then as a whole?
No. I don't believe in these riots in the street. I mean, this anarchy should have been stopped immediately. The minute a fire lights up is not a demonstration anymore. The minute a fire lights, it's a riot. You do not get to destroy other people's property. You just do not. And I'm disgusted at the amount of that's been allowed to go on. And that business that happened in Kenosha, where that guy had his AR with him. Now, I've been waiting for this. I knew this would happen because the biggest responsibility with having a gun is knowing when not to shoot. That's the biggest responsibility. And you can see that in the professionalism. Like the best examples when the Navy SEALs went for bin Laden. They went through his whole complex and they didn't kill anybody they didn't need to kill. They were going into dark rooms, dark hallways, whatever.
They're professionals. They know precisely what they're doing. Yeah, they don't waste a bullet.
Acquire that target and not shoot the wrong person. Yeah. And that's what they did. So the biggest responsibility is not to shoot. So everybody that claims their support of the Second Amendment, I do as well. But you cannot forget that is there to protect you from the government. Now, it's not like any individual can take on the U.S. Army. But when you get activity like the looting that's going on, rioting that's going on, where they're burning people's property, and the government is sanctioning it by not suppressing it, that is essentially the government's action, and the government's essentially responsible for that, for allowing it to happen. That's almost your Second Amendment duty to take that out. And that's the way that kid envisioned it in that went up, the one that got caught in Kenosha with his gun. And he was attacked. I don't know if you saw what actually transpired. That guy had the gun. He also had a first aid kit. And he was called there because he had family members that had a business in the town. And they wanted help because their places were being burned down. So he went up, and open carry is legal in Wisconsin, so they were okay with that. I don't know about whether he was at 17, if he was legal to carry that, I don't know. But he had it. And what initially happened was they had a dumpster on fire, and they were trying to roll it towards some gas pumps to start a gas station on fire. He ran up, he picked up fire extinguishers from somewhere and put the dumpster out and pissed them off. So that's when they came after him. That's when he shot one of them, and it went downhill from there. But he wasn't there initially to go shoot people and didn't think he'd have to defend himself, but in case he did, he had it. But to me, when the government allows that kind of activity to go on, local government, it's still the government, they allow that to happen. They're allowing people's property, they're depriving their citizens of the use of their property. They're not using the police forces that the citizen is paying for to protect the property. That means they're complicit in it. And so at that point, it's almost like that's your Second Amendment obligation and right to defend yourself, because that's almost an extension of the government, because it's not being taken care of in the way that it's supposed to. But we're at a flashpoint right now where only so much, you're starting to see it come up, but there's a lot of people that aren't as cool-headed. I mean, that kid was pretty cool-headed the way he did it. I mean, he didn't waste a lot of bullets, and he shot people that were hurting him. So,
do you think that there's an argument to be made, though, that he should have not even been there in the first place with an AR-15? I know that, I mean, the local, I mean, so you're saying that there were no police present at all with the rioting?
They've been told to stand down. They're just allowing them to burn the cities down, which they did in Portland, and they're doing all over the country. They did it in Chicago.
Yeah, but I haven't heard of no police intervention whatsoever. That seems...
Well, I mean, how did the place get burned down?
Well, people become very violent, and I think at some point...
Well, don't you think at that point they're fair game?
For intervention of some variety, I would think so, but there's only a finite amount of police officers, and I would have to be in that situation.
And this is what we kind of started with in the beginning, as far as escalation of anger, right?
Yeah.
At what point does somebody hit you over the head with a skateboard? Do you get to shoot him? It's at that point, because you brought a skateboard to a gunfight, doesn't make me bad.
I know. Just the whole scenario where you have citizens out in the street killing each other with guns. I mean, that just seems like the wild, wild west.
Well, I mean, I've been known to say that, growing up on the South Side, and I've been known that almost anything can be made into a weapon.
Yes.
Almost anything, and the comical arguments that the news tries to make about assault weapons and all this, it's almost an embarrassment watching the lack of qualification these people have to be talking about the subjects they're talking about. And like I said, it's almost an embarrassment. And so to think anybody can believe that stuff that they say, and anybody can buy into it. I mean, but there's...
Well, I think the argument with the assault-style weapons is just the large magazine clips, like something that you would never ever use for like hunting.
The Second Amendment is not for hunting.
Well, I understand that. Yeah, I think that is when people refer to assault-style rifles, it is the context is these are weapons designed to kill people or to injure people. They're not really weapons that you would ever use for hunting.
But the Second Amendment is not for hunting.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand your argument.
It's to kill people.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in that situation, if you got anarchy, at what point, what people don't realize is they're blaming Trump for not having sent the government in, the Fed in. The Fed cannot intervene in a state. They cannot without the governor inviting them in. One of my little experiences when I worked for the state is we were invited to go down to Louisiana when Katrina hit. We had developed some satellite trailers at the state of Illinois. We were going to use them for remote lottery stations, and we had it prototyped. And we were trying to get the governor to approve it, so we could roll these very VSAT dishes out to remote locations that didn't have good internet, so they could actually have lottery sales. When Katrina hit, and we began to hear about, because I was involved with IEMA, the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, and Anti-Terrorism Task Force. I was involved with all that when I was at the state. So we were getting information on what was happening in Louisiana. My boss went to the governor and he said, "Look, let us put the satellite system together. We'll roll it down to Louisiana and we'll help them out." Well, in order for us to do that, the governor of Louisiana had to invite us to do that. We could not just show up down there.
Yeah. So there's state autonomy, right? The government can't come in.
And so when people are still saying it on the news, they're saying, Trump's offering to go in, and they're making it sound like he's offering, but he doesn't really want to go. It's not that. He cannot go in unless the governor and then eventually the mayor allows him into their jurisdiction. But on the news, it's not that clear to everybody that it's kind of being misrepresented. Like he's making the offer, and they think he's like standing back there saying, "Well, I'm going to offer you something I'm never going to give you, because you're never going to let me."
Yeah.
But that's not it. He's willing to go in. He's done it. He's willing to do it, and he'd love to do it. Because nobody wants to see these cities destroyed the way they're being destroyed.
No, I don't think that anyone from anywhere in the country likes to watch rioting and burning down of private property. It is an unfortunate side effect to the unfortunate side effect to the racial disparity that kind of has plagued our country for hundreds of years. So starting from the obviously the slavery roots, and then that has perpetuated throughout time and whatnot. And then I think it just kind of boiled over. And then you had all of the, when you look at the percentages when it's, to the rioting and the looting and all of that to the peaceful protesting, I think the vast majority of the demonstrations going on are peaceful protests, which, as you know, are protected under the First Amendment. And then, of course, they're peaceful, so they don't really bother anyone. I mean, I know that sometimes that there's the blocking of traffic, and that, I don't agree with that either. But the vast majority, from what I have seen, have been peaceful demonstrations. And of course, you have the rioting and the looting that takes place as well. And I don't know anyone that agrees with it. It is an unfortunate consequence, though, I think, of all of the tensions kind of boiling over.
Well, the tension is being manufactured. When
manufactured by who?
By the kind of by the media. Yeah, kind of by the media.
So when you say, okay, so I guess we should dig a little bit into the tension then. So are you talking about like the racial disparity then?
Well, there's race pimps out there, right? Now let me ask you a question. So we got so the word racist. I mean, This is because they've been using this word for a long time.
Yes.
It's really even a bastardization of the English language, because you take any word and you put IST after it pretty much, and it means you're an expert. It doesn't mean you're a bad guy. If you're an artist, you're kind of an expert on art. If you're a cardiologist, you're kind of an expert on the heart. Mm-hmm. Anywhere, any skill like that, you put an IST after, you're a practitioner of it. So initially, that's what it was. That's what the word was for. Is that there are characteristics, and when I grew up, there were only 4 races: white, red, yellow, black. But in the 60s, they created all these races, which were really nationalities. So somebody is really working overtime to create division points within our society. When we were in white, red, yellow, black, 4 races, and that you cannot take Hispanics.
Well, race. No, sorry to interrupt you, Jim, but race is purely a human construct. And I'm assuming that you've probably...
Well, yes, and the first categorization was my skin, and that was white, red, yellow, black.
Yeah.
And I learned that, and I was okay with it. But then when they tried to do it with the now they call this Latinx crap. You know why we really don't like this? Because my wife happens to be Mexican, and so we really don't like these people bundling together whoever they feel like to get to create a group that is going to polarize somebody. If it's most Mexicans will identify as Mexican. They will not identify as Latinx, or what they were trying to do Chicano, and they were trying to do Hispanic, mm-hmm. and all that. They're not anywhere near the same. Every country that Spain went into and left their mark, their genes, had some other racial makeup to start with, or some other racial markup. It could have been black. It could have been brown. It could have been Asian even. I could cite any one of them. If you go to the Philippines, guess what? They're Asian and Spanish. If you go to Jamaica, they're black and not Jamaica. Hispaniola, say, for instance.
Yeah.
They're black.
Yeah. I think that this kind of appeals to the inner nature of human beings to want to to create like us versus them. Like we're very tribalistic
right.
in nature.
And I
yeah, very
refuse-
tribalistic in nature.
Yeah, and I refuse to deal with it. And then you know, the other thing that's caused the problem is you know, the Great Society that was created in the '60s by Johnson, right? You know, LBJ. That was what pretty much destroyed the black family, because the welfare laws were written in a way that if there was a man in the house, they didn't get a check. And you know, and at the same time that was going on, because that's when I first started working my career, and there were plenty of guys that worked with me that were black. We were all in the same job. We were all buddies. And one of them, I remember him telling me specifically, he said, yeah, lived in the projects, they love living in the projects. But he said, you know, because there was the projects weren't bad in the 60s, right? In the 60s, they were not, in the early 60s. And this guy lived in there, and he said his dad was actually refusing raises in order to maintain his place there.
Yeah.
And so, sorry about this. So you know, it's been just one kind of device. So at that time there was no real issue. And then you know, and I told you about my Tuskegee Airman buddy. He gave me a book that was written by one of his buddies that was captured, and this guy describes his lifestyle as he grew up in Detroit in the '30s. And he had a car, he was going to college, and he was black. And so they had exactly the same aspirations as we did, all the way up into the '60s. And the, you know, and there might have been some pockets in the South that were more backward on it, but you know, there was plenty that were just like us. But in the '60s, when the Great Society came about and the welfare laws were rewritten to break up the black families, basically, that's pretty much what destroyed that population. Because the first unit of society has got to be the family.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know enough to comment on that, to be honest with you, Jim. I mean, I don't have a strong background in the.
Look it up.
What's that?
Look it up.
No, yeah. I'm definitely interested now. So you said that these were welfare laws were written under LBJ?
Yes, yes, they were. It was called the Great Society.
Okay.
It was around 1965.
1965. Okay. I'll definitely check that out, because I am, of course, interested to learn anything about, I suppose, American history. But real quickly then, so just to circle back, systemic racism isn't something that you think exists in this country then?
No, it's a construct just to keep division going. I mean, like I said, the first thing, the word racist is stupid. It was created by somebody. It was actually the word first showed up in France, and it really had to do with worries about different communities actually integrating. But it wasn't about this community's bad, this one's not. It was just understanding what the genes were.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
No, yeah, I can understand. So the ideology of the word racist or racism, but in your opinion, what do you think an adequate definition would be? I mean, I have my views on it. What do you think?
There's no reason for a definition. They're humans.
You don't think that there's any sort of discrimination between, you know, that someone can have towards another person based off of their race?
I can just based on an individual's experience, there are certain situations you may be more likely to think you're going to be mugged than others. I could tell you that as a kid, you know, where I told you where I grew up.
Yeah.
I could tell you that even though I went to school every day, and you know, and I think it's even more interesting, because even as say second grade, I was walking to school, which was about a half a mile each way by myself. You know, across 59th Street into that school, and I went there and walked back, and it wasn't really a problem, you know. But we still talked back and forth in the school. We knew that. I still remember when my friend that, you know, made the comment about the communists saw the first black kid he ever saw. He said, your skin is black. And the kid said, no, it's a nice brown. That's the conversation we had. It wasn't a bad conversation. But then I remember in fifth grade being told they were having like a paper drive. In the old days, they used to collect newspapers and take them to the junkyard, and they'd recycle them, and they got money for them. So everybody would bring their old newspapers to the school, and they would have a big truck there, and the kids would load load the stuff into the truck and they take it to wherever they recycled it. It was something that they did, and a lot of places like that did it to raise money.
Yeah.
And
so, real.
But I
so,
just, but
yeah, go ahead.
So
go ahead.
just the only reason I brought it up is because I'm volunteering to go there. I'm in like 5th grade. I'll come over and help you load the papers, and the nun says to me, and this had to be 1960. No, this had to be like 1958. Are you sure that your mom will let you come with the race riots going on? Because there were race riots in 1958.
Yeah.
And,
no, it's certainly unfortunate that we appear to still be dealing with this issue over division with race. And you said you don't think that systemic racism is a thing. It has been studied for decades by social scientists, and there's a lot of science, good science, that has been done that shows that there are still racial disparities within the country. And do you not like acknowledge that? Do you not?
I don't know if you call. I mean, is it a part of understanding that if you see a certain person come in, you're more or less likely to be mugged, right?
Stereotyping, are you talking about? Like stereotyping?
Well, stereotype is just common sense. What does your experience tell you about a situation?
No, this is true. Yeah, but it certainly isn't perfect, right? It can definitely lead you astray.
It's just an approximation.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. But it's still valid.
To a degree. What if you had better quality evidence, though? So, I mean, this is why science is so important, because with the scientific method, you're able to generate really high quality evidence that is better than anecdotes. Because it's been turned through this process. You have many different people looking at it from many different angles to minimize biases that creep in, because everyone has those.
But we've said that the more that the government has been involved with the life of the black population, the more they have kind of screwed them up with the welfare laws, with abortion laws, with lots of social engineering that's been worked into government programs. And so they've really been manipulated by that. But there was a point where they weren't. That's the point. The point is when I went to school, most of the kids, black or white, had a family in the 60s. But progressively more and more, even in suburban white families, there's plenty of fatherless kids. And that's just part of it. When you can see the socialists know that the nuclear family is one of their biggest problems, because the nuclear family has something that has a structure to it so they have to convert the whole family. Otherwise the family will try to maintain its own independence. And so the more that they can get access to the individuals of the family and separate it, then the greater influence they can have. That was all stuff in Saul Alinsky. That was Rules for Radicals. It was in it's in the Communist Manifesto. That the nuclear family.
So your thinking then is that the socialist arm of government had deliberately broken apart black families?
Yeah, and they're working on white families now too, frankly.
By doing what with regular families?
Well, look at just the lifestyles that are going on in the country right now, just the expectations. I mean, the numbers bear it out by the number of kids that are born, say, out of wedlock. Now, I'm not saying this from a religious perspective or anything else. I'm just saying that, if you breed it, you feed it, right? If you're going to make children, you feed it until it's an adult and can make its own decisions. And a lot of people don't feel that way now. And those kids become part of the state.
So you think that that's a recent problem then?
No, I
think you probably have had that problem for ages, where you have parents not being parents.
No, you really didn't. Not to this level. Not to this level. I mean, I can tell you what happened in high school back in the day when a girl got pregnant. She disappeared for a while. Basically what happened is they disappeared. They went to either a convent or some kind of a halfway house somewhere. They had the baby. The baby was adopted. and that was it. But now that they're having them, and if they'll get a bigger check if they keep them.
Yeah. So the incentives to keep having children. Yeah, no, that definitely is unfortunate. However, going back to your comment about, people are just having a lot of kids these days and not raising them, in general, the number of children being born towards the average American or average American couple is actually declining. It's at its lowest rate that it's been in the past 50 years.
Did you know that was a concerted effort? In the 80s, I became aware of something. You can look it up today. It still exists. Global 2000.
It's a consequence of people becoming more industrialized, and it's something that you see across all first world nations. Where, as you look at a country or an area of the world when it is lower level. So let's talk about first world, second world, third world. So let's say third world and developing. The children have a higher chance of dying. So you have women or couples having large amounts of children. And then as you become industrialized, women become educated, they get access to birth control. They know that their children have a higher chance of actually surviving childhood. They realize that they don't need to have as many kids. So you see a lot of people having less kids. And it's just, we've seen this across the board. It's not just in the United States, but other industrialized first world nations like Japan, Norway, Finland, Sweden, they all had declining birth rates between of couples around 2 or below 2.
But it's been like I said, it was a concerted effort, and it was I had a name. The name was Global 2000, and this was a plan, and it came from Europe. That was get everybody down to zero population growth by the year 2000. That was an objective.
Whose objective?
The people that were the founders and operators of Global 2000.
Global 2000. So
I'll look it up. I'll find it for you. I can still find it.
Are they a part of the government then, or?
It's like the socialists that are in the subculture that exists. I can find references to it.
Do you not agree with the declining birth rate?
Oh, no.
It seems like from a sustainability standpoint. I don't know how you could really disagree with it, but of course I'm willing to entertain anything.
Like I said, you got to not create more than you can take care of.
No, I don't know anyone that would disagree with that, Jim. I don't.
No, but people do it.
Of course they do. Yeah, of course they do. And that is still a problem. We're talking about Illinois in particular, Chicago. We have this issue within the lower rungs of or lower classes of our society, where you have people who are living off of government assistance, and then there's incentive to have more children. And I'd have to look more into that, but if that is basically the end all and that's the only information available, then I would definitely say that something needs to be done about that. Some sort of program needs to be created to disincentivize that, or the laws need to be changed a little bit. Of course, you can't just let these kids, run around in the street and starve to death. That's inhumane, but if the system is currently set up to a degree to incentivize just having as many children as possible,
sometimes when you create too much goodness, you just got to pull some back. Like, for instance, during this pandemic thing, they're all running around screaming about the children that are starving because they don't go to school to get a meal. Well, their mom's getting food stamps. They're supposed to feed them. And they don't, so you create another program, and now we're obligated to 2 programs to feed the kids. The family's still getting the food stamps, and then we got to have another setup in the school system to feed the kids when they come to school. I brought my cheese sandwich to school. My mother made it for me. They could do the same. But the more that they assume responsibility as parent to be the parent of these kids, the more they become the government's kids.
Yeah, there definitely has to be more individual responsibility, and how exactly you go about doing that, and simultaneously ensuring that we don't have children starving in the streets is an answer that I don't really have.
Well,
at the moment.
It's one of those things. Sometimes this is a tough decision.
Yeah, it's a very hard decision.
Sometimes you have to say there are acceptable losses. Now you'll say, allowing children to die. I'm not the one that allowed it. I didn't create it,
Well, no system is perfect, and at the end of the day, are we doing the best that we can? And if there are people who are always going to die in whatever system that we create. It's just a part of life. But minimizing those losses is a priority. Just like minimizing abuses within the systems that we create, it should be a priority. Going back to the pandemic real quick here. Do you agree with the handling of it? Do you acknowledge that it's something that exists?
I think Trump. See, here's the thing. So in my career, I've known many CEOs, right? And the truth is, Trump wasn't my first choice. I really wanted a strict constitutionalist because I want the country to be run by the rules that exist, or change the rules through the process that's made. Don't just arbitrarily do what you're doing. And so I really would have preferred a strict constitutionalist. Trump wasn't my first choice, but given the potential felon as the president-elect, I had to go with him. And I'm very happy with him. There are some things that, I tell you about separating concerns. When he made the comment to John McCain that about John McCain, because John McCain was a POW, ex-POW, and he made that flippant comment, well, I like non-POWs, Well, that should have hurt me because my dad was a POW. But I can compartmentalize that as, all right, that's flippant talk. That's what he said. I'm not going to get hung up on that. That's not going to stop me from listening to what he's saying.
Yeah, but that's not really like singular for Trump, though. I mean, Trump makes flippant comments all the time.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, so looking at them in their entirety, shouldn't there be some sort of, this man is, he's not terribly presidential. He's not diplomatic.
Well,
I mean, he's a bit of a bully. I think that if you look at his debate styles and how he interacts on Twitter.
Bully is another term that I'm amused by because, you know what? When I grew up, we took care of ourselves. That's it. We took care of it. And if there was a bully, well, then two of you went and got that bully. That's what you did. So we took care of our bullies. But what we have now is we have like administrative bullies. Like, I'm going to sue you. That's the worst thing I want, is to be part of that system. I'll take hand to hand any day than to be part of that system. Really. I mean, find me a jury of my peers. Find me somebody that has lived my life. That's my peer, not just somebody that wants a day off work and goes to sit in the courtroom for a day as a jurist. It's very difficult to get a jurist that's going to be of any quality. So I avoid the system. I don't want anything to do with the system. So I stay.
So would you consider yourself more of like a libertarian then?
I guess so.
Yeah, where you just kind of like no government whatsoever, or like very very small government.
Very small government. Yeah, I mean, less with less. Yeah. Less with less. Take less from me, do less for me. That's what I want. And if you just do the articulated powers in the Constitution, that's all they got to do. Get rid of all the rest of the crap, I'd probably be happy. I mean.
I just don't think that the Constitution really can capture all aspects of like American society.
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to.
I mean, they're great axioms, right? It's a great starting point. I think that it's a wonderful document.
But it doesn't have to. Yeah. Why don't you want your freedom?
Yeah, of course I want freedom. I think everybody wants freedom.
But you want your freedom, right? And so you don't want to have to go to the government and get a permit for everything you want to do. There used to be a statue. Now they're tearing all the statues down. But I can't remember who the statue was, but it was in Grant Park before they built the Grant Park Garage. And it was, I don't know who the guy was, but the inscription was something, I'll paraphrase it, an individual's rights extend to the point where they impact another individual's rights. That's the way to look at rights. It's if what you're doing is impacting somebody else's right, then you hit your limit. You can't go past that.
Yeah.
And that's really all you got to know.
It just seems overly simplistic. I would love to live in a world that was simple, Jim. I really, really would.
Well, I mean,
it just seems, given how complex society is and how complex the world is.
It's been made to be complex.
But I don't know if it's avoidable. That's the thing. It just seems like we're increasingly becoming more complex, and that we can't.
So you create another agency to make it less complex?
While adding to complexity in the process, because you created another agency. I don't.
Right.
Look, I mean, possibly. Like, listen, so to a degree, I of course agree with you that optimizing government intervention in anything is something that we should strive for. don't waste money. Make sure that you have the right amount of people to get the job done. Optimizing government overreach. I don't think that the government has a right to come in and dictate completely how I live my life. But it is nice. I mean, at the end of the day, they're people, just like you and I, right? These are people that we elect to these positions.
But I think I described to you, though, the attitude that they get when I experienced when I was in the government.
And I can certainly appreciate
they get
that.
a level of power.
Yes. And I think you can make a similar argument, though, with people that gain power in the private sector as well.
But you know what? I don't have to buy their product.
You know what?
I don't have to buy their product.
That's true. But you don't have to vote for the politician either.
It's different. It's different. There's not necessarily another option. See, we're in the private, and that's the beauty of our society. If there's a market, there's going to be enough people to serve that market as the market can support.
Okay.
That are going to participate in it, and every one of those participants is an option for me. And if not, I'll build it myself.
Yeah.
I don't.
I think to a degree, I agree with you on that. That you definitely have more options when it comes to the private sector than you do with the the public sector.
Do you remember before the Department of Education existed?
I do not know.
Okay, I do. And in the 70s and 80s, when I was when I was in school, I'd look at a lot of studies. That's why I know about Global 2000. I used to read a lot of things and so there used to be studies about the education systems across the world, right? And before there was a Department of Education, the U.S. was always one or two compared to the Russians. That was it. Out of every country in the world, the U.S. was always one or two. Russia was one, we were two, or the other way around. They always competed back and forth, and the other European countries were kind of like in the lower than that. And now we're like 39 in the world. Now that we have the Department of Education, and look at that nonsense. The most recent thing, that Common Core they were trying to put on our people. I mean, they pretty much destroyed the education system. They made it into daycare. They made it into a lunchroom. They made it into a busing thing. And they don't. And now they're getting rid of the books. So they pretty much destroyed the education system. So really, they just need to get out of it. Let the state run the education system, because you can vote for the people in the state. You can look them in. You don't have to go that far to look them in the eye and have a conversation with them. But in the Fed, you cannot find somebody in the Department of Education to talk to. And so you do not need those bureaucrats in there doing all this stuff. And that's just one agency. I mean, there's plenty of them,
Yeah, I can't defend all of the government agencies' actions. We could talk, ad infinitum or like forever about where exactly do you draw the line. Regarding education, I absolutely agree that the education system in this country needs to be improved. And how exactly do we go about doing that? I don't precisely know at this moment in time.
You know what?
There are some interesting solutions coming from the private sector to try to, fix what has happened in the public sector.
Yeah.
For example, like the online learning, like Coursera. I think that's a nonprofit though, but it's still not government funded. It's still within the private sector. But it's a really, really interesting idea for online learning and opening up access to education to anyone that has an internet connection.
So for me, I took the long way around to get my education, right? Because before I went in the military, I wasn't ready for it. I just didn't want it. I was a little bit too free spirited. The military was there, and I had a friend of mine who legitimately went to, he worked all summer after high school, got accepted at IIT, finished his first semester. He had to work all summer, right, to get his tuition, right. He went to school. The next I don't know if it was the next year or the next semester, he had to take a semester off to work to accumulate money again, because there were not student loans like there are now. So he worked. And while he was off working to accumulate his tuition, it was a legit job too. He was at Motorola. He got his greetings letter. He was drafted. Well, he didn't want to go. He didn't go. He was underground the rest of his life, right? So that was the way it was. And so for me, I didn't have the financial means to go to school, go to college after high school. My family certainly didn't. And that's why I went to work at the phone company right away. And they had some tuition aid, but it wouldn't have been enough to really for me to go to school and work at the same time and try to get an education. So that's why I just conceded. I went to the military. Plus, I didn't mind defending my country. So that's what I did. When I got out, I had the GI Bill. So I finished my associate degree in the junior colleges because I was raising my family at the same time. So I wasn't like going away to school. So I finished my associate degree. And it took a few years because of the schedule I had to work.
Yeah, right? Of course.
And then I was off for a few years. I didn't go to school at all. And then I went back to school. But what I noticed, so during the Vietnam War, it was the biggest. Vietnam War was the biggest boon, I'd say, to the education system because so many people went draft dodgers. They went into the education system to get a 2S deferment, because if you were a full-time student, you got a 2S deferment. You did not get drafted as long as you had a 2S deferment. So, but if you failed a class, one class, two classes, I don't know what the criteria was, but you were likely to lose your deferment if you were not succeeding in school. So. Okay. So people were taking basket weaving. We joke about it, but a lot of humanities and social studies.
Yeah, of course, people are going to take the easy way out.
Which I call those opinion classes because there's really no science behind most of them. It's just whatever the teacher wants you to put down, and you get an A in those humanity classes and social sciences classes. That's kind of what they are. And so these people took those classes, and then after 4 years, guess what? The war's still going on. They're unemployable with the degree they got. So they get a master's degree. And then 2 years later, the war's still going on, they're unemployable, they get their PhD. Well, now they become a professor. Okay, first strike against them, draft dodger. They refused to go serve their country when it needed them. Secondly, didn't take meaningful subjects in college. Third, they're unemployable in the private market, so they become a professor. So now they become a professor. This is when the colleges got really, really liberal. This is at the same time, because I went to school over so many years, I got to see the number and the type of humanities classes that were being added to the curriculums. And why? Because they absorbed all these people, draft dodgers, absorbed them into the system, and they're the radicals that have been indoctrinating the kids ever since, because they're justifying their initial cowardice by not doing their job, not supporting their country.
Well, I mean, I don't want to sit here and, rip apart the humanities. I mean, there's certainly.
I'm just saying.
I mean, and there's also another argument to be made too that it's not just you're talking about the liberal atmosphere of colleges these days. I mean, I don't know if that's absolutely every college campus. I know that it's probably fair to say that a good chunk of them are liberal, progressive, gender neutral bathrooms, things of this nature. However, I mean, I don't think you're going to find that like across the entire institution. I mean, there are still very hard sciences and things of that nature
less and less.
I don't know if they're being loaded up on humanities though, like top heavy on humanities.
Well, they did that because they absorbed all these people, and then the.
But I mean, what would be the incentive from the universities to do that, to absorb these people?
Because every student is tuition. Because at the same time, the Fed came up with a more enhanced student loan program. Right? I mean, the states used to manage student loan programs. With State of Illinois had one. They used to, and I worked with the people in that agency.
Yeah, we still have that. We still have federally backed.
It's even more though. It's federally backed. You see, that's the point. The point is when the Fed puts money into a market, they create another distortion.
This is true. I think that any sort of manipulation that you make in any aspect of society is going to change it in some way, and that whether and how it changes, hopefully. The pros outweigh the cons. There's always going to be side effects, right? And I think fundamentally, too, having a more educated population makes sense for a country.
If it was education, so let's say we get out of the humanities and social studies and get into math, science, engineering, and spend time on that, and cut down the scope. See, because that's really the issue. The issue is that people they're not learning useful skills, and then they get out and they really don't know they're unemployable. When I in my jobs, I really hated the fact that I had to use foreign contractors in the IT industry. I really hated that. I really didn't like it at all.
Instead of Americans.
Yeah, I really didn't like it at all. But guess what? I couldn't get candidates. Our colleges were not putting out enough. So it used to be in the universities, they actually did core research. They really did core research. They really did engineering. I mean, but not anymore.
I mean, is this just kind of like a feeling that you have? Or like what evidence do you have that we don't do enginering anymore? I mean, that just
there's
seems.
some.
I mean, that seems a little far fetched.
Well,
we don't do engineering.
There's some, but again, I said a lot of it's anecdotal. A lot of it is that when I went to school myself, when I transitioned from the junior colleges, when I went for my 4-year degree, I wanted one that had a schedule and a proximity to me that was actually useful. So I ended up going to Roosevelt, the most liberal college we probably have around here, But I was able to get the IT training I wanted because they didn't have any IT professors. They were hiring them all out of Bell Labs. So I was able to get what I wanted in that niche. But I had to take art classes and all kinds of stuff I never had no interest in. So, but I understand. I'm glad I did only because now I can speak about it with some level of credibility anyway, because I did it, I was in it, I went to, they made me go, and I did them off campus too, which is kind of interesting now because I just didn't want to go to a classroom.
Yeah.
So I did them off campus. They gave me a book of places I had to visit, exhibits I had to look at. I was supposed to critique it, and then I'd turn it into a professor, and the professor we'd have phone calls, whatever we had to do, right? So I mean, I saw it, I understand it, and I said, this is going to be entertaining if it's what you like to do, but I'm not an observer, I'm a doer. So for me to go and want to look at art, I can get it. I could sit there and calm down for a minute and probably enjoy it, but I'd rather not.
It's certainly not for everyone.
But I didn't like taking the classes. See, they made me take the classes. I'm strictly an engineer.
You're talking about like your general requirements that you have to take when.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why do they?
I'm not a huge fan of that either. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I do, like, for example, writing, like English. I think that's fair. I think that the average person should know how to.
So.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But some of the general requirements I think are worth getting rid of. Maybe there's some that are worth adding, like, for example, critical thinking, I think should actually be a part of a general requirement
I wouldn't trust them to actually be able to.
You wouldn't trust them to be able to do it?
No.
That's fair. Anyway, Jim, we've talked about a number of wonderful topics, and I just want to thank you again for coming on. For those of you that are joining us, thank you so much. I really, really hope that you have learn from this interaction between Jim and I. Obviously, there's a number of things that we don't agree on, but none of us were yelling at each other. We just sat and had a civilized conversation, and hopefully each of us had learned something from one another. We'll go home and maybe do some reading of our own. Make sure to share on social media. Go ahead and hit that like button, leave us a review, and definitely stay tuned until the next episode. Take care.